The obituary for humanity was read aloud on a channel that every civilized world in the arm was required, by treaty, to receive. It came in the flat, ceremonial cadence the conquered reserved for the closing of an account. A herald of the Vel'Shaan Hegemony stood in a chamber of pale stone somewhere in the core systems, its 4 eyes lowered in the posture their people used for the reading of the dead, and it spoke the words that would be copied into 10,000 archives and taught to children who had never seen a human face. "Let it be recorded across the conquered of worlds," the herald said, "that the species designated human, native to the water world at Sol, has ceased. Their orbital defenses are broken. Their homeworld is dark. Their fleets are ash upon the ecliptic. Where their voices once crowded our channels, there is silence. The hegemony has weighed them and found them ended. Let the Chinese letter lanes be reopened. Let the mourning be brief, for they earned no long grief. The matter of the humans is closed." 40 light-years from that chamber of pale stone, in the deep cold between 2 nameless stars, a young officer named Wren Adeyemi listened to the recording for the 4th time and did not blink. She was 26 years old, and she had the kind of face that had not yet decided whether it belonged to a girl or a commander. Broad cheekbones, a scar through one eyebrow from a training accident, she still refused to explain, dark eyes that had learned in the last 11 months to hold very still when everything inside her wanted to shake. She wore the gray of the deep service, the coverall stripped of every reflective thread, and she sat alone in a monitoring alcove no larger than a coffin, because on the ship she served, that was where the intercept feeds came in. The ship had a name, though almost no one in the galaxy knew it existed. She was the Ceto, and she was a planet killer. Not a metaphor, not a boast painted on a hull. The Ceto was one of 6 hulls of the Leviathan program, built in the decade of fear after humanity's first contact went wrong, hidden in the years of false peace that followed, and given a single design purpose that her builders had written into the keel in letters no crew ever saw: to end a world if a world tried to end Earth. She was 9 kilometers of armored dark. She carried weapons that had never been fired in anger, drives that could fold the space around her into a bruise, and a magazine whose contents were classified above the rank of the men who had ordered her construction. She had spent the last 11 months running silent through the black on a single long trajectory, engines cold, radiating nothing, a mote of frozen iron falling through a universe that had just declared her people extinct. Wren pulled the recording up a 5th time and made herself watch the herald's mouth. "Their homeworld is dark," it said again. She reached out and paused it there on that word, dark. Earth was dark. That part was true, and it was the part that had emptied something out of her in the first hour after the intercept came in, so that for a while she had simply sat in the alcove with her hands open on her knees, unable to close them. 11 months ago, the Vel'Shaan had come to Sol with a fleet that outmassed everything humanity had ever put into orbit, and they had done exactly what they said. They had broken the orbital rings. They had burned the home fleet on the ecliptic. They had put enough fire into the atmosphere that the recording drones the Ceto had left behind in the outer system showed a planet wrapped in ash, its oceans gone the color of old iron, its night side no longer lit by the constellations of human cities, but by the dull red of a world still cooling from the wound. That was true, Earth was dark. But the Vel'Shaan had made one error in their obituary, and Wren Adeyemi had built the last 11 months of her life around the shape of it. They had counted the fleets on the ecliptic. They had counted the rings, the shipyards, the defense platforms, every hull that answered a hail or lit a drive or died where they could see it die. And when the counting was done and the numbers matched their intelligence, they had closed the account. They were an old and careful people, and their carefulness had a floor to it. They only counted what they could see. They had never seen the Leviathans. No one had. That was the whole point of them. 6 hulls built in 6 different lies, a deep-water mining consortium, a Kuiper survey initiative, a decommissioning yard, a research station that studied nothing, launched one at a time over 11 years, each one going dark the moment it cleared the yard and never lighting up again. They did not patrol. They did not exercise. They did not answer musters. They fell, on long cold arcs through the dark places between the stars, to precomputed stations from which, if the worst ever came, they could reach an enemy's heart. Their crews were volunteers who had signed away contact with home for the length of a deployment measured in years. Their existence was known to perhaps 40 living people, and 11 months ago most of those 40 people had been on Earth. Wren closed the recording. In the sudden quiet of the alcove she could hear the ship around her, not the engines, which were cold, but the small human sounds that 9 kilometers of hull could not quite swallow. The tick of the hull contracting as the Ceto passed through a colder region of the dark, the whisper of the air handlers, and far off through the deck, someone in the aft berthing running the same 6-note melody on a thumb piano they had run every ship's night for 11 months, because it was the only music they were allowed and silence was worse. She was the youngest bridge-qualified officer on the Ceto. She had come aboard as an ensign, a signals specialist, 25 years old, sure of exactly 2 things: that the deployment would be 4 years of boredom in a coffin, and that nothing would ever actually happen. Both of those certainties had died in a single hour 11 months ago along with 4 billion people, and the girl who had held them had not survived either. What was left was a lieutenant, field promoted twice, as the war took the officers above her in ways the war should not have been able to reach, who had learned to hold still. She keyed the internal line to the bridge. Signals to command. I have a full confidence decode on the Concord broadcast. It's the obituary. They're telling the whole arm we're gone. There was a pause. Then the voice of the Ceto's master came back, and it was not the voice of an old man, though Wren had once expected it would be. Captain Ilse Vandal was 34 and had been the 3rd officer of the Ceto when the deployment began. She had inherited the chair the way Wren had inherited the bridge, by outliving the people who should have held it, when a coolant failure 8 months into the run had taken the captain, the exec, and the chief engineer in the same bad shift, and had nearly taken the whole ship. Vandal had a voice like a dry riverbed, and she used as few words as the situation allowed. "Confirmed extinct," Vandal said. "Well, that simplifies our intelligence picture. Adeyemi, log it and bring it to the well. All watch officers, 20 minutes. Wren logged it. Then she sat for one more moment in the coffin-sized dark, and she let herself feel, for exactly the length of one long breath, the thing she was not allowed to feel on the bridge. They think we're already dead, she thought, so they've stopped looking behind them. The command well of the Ceto was a wound of light in the center of 9 kilometers of dark. It was buried at the ship's core, wrapped in armor and shock baffle and the strange cold machinery of the fold drive, so that even here, even at the heart of a planet killer, the men and women who ran her spoke quietly and moved carefully, as if the galaxy might hear them through the hull. Wren came in at the low door and took her station at the signal's repeater, without being told. There were 11 officers in the well, which was every watch officer on the ship who could be spared from a post, and the number told its own story. The Ceto had launched with a wardroom of 40. War had taken some. The coolant failure had taken more. The long dark had taken a few in ways that had nothing to do with the enemy. The human mind was not built to fall silent through the black for 11 months, and 2 of the crew had gone into the medical freeze rather than into the dark, places their thoughts had opened. 40 had become 11 at the top and 190 in the whole ship, and every one of them had the same quality Wren had learned to recognize in the mirror: the stillness of people who had already grieved themselves and had nothing left to spend on fear. Captain Vandal stood at the central plot with her hands behind her back. She was a spare, weathered woman with close-cropped gray-brown hair gone prematurely pale at the temples, and she waited until the low door sealed before she spoke. You've all seen the intercept by now, she said. The hegemony has declared us extinct. In about 4 hours, that recording will reach the nearest conquered relay and start propagating across 200 worlds. By the end of the month, every species in the arm will believe the human race is a closed matter. She let that sit. I want to talk about what that means, and then I want to talk about what we're going to do, and I want to do both without anyone in this well pretending we are something we are not. We are the survivors of an extinction. There are, as far as we can confirm, 190 human beings alive in this ship, and an unknown number in 5 other ships we have not been able to contact, and no one else. That is the honest picture. Nobody flinched from it. Nobody flinched. Wren watched the faces around the plot and saw only that terrible stillness. Now, Vandal said, the enemy has made a mistake, and I want to be precise about the shape of it because our lives are going to be built on that shape. She touched the plot, and a starfield bloomed, and in it a single amber mote. This is us. We are here because 11 years ago someone with more foresight than budget decided that if Earth ever died, it should not die alone, and it should not die without an answer. The Leviathan program exists for one reason. Not defense. Not deterrence. Deterrence failed. Deterrence is ash on the ecliptic. We exist so that a species which murders humanity discovers that murder was not the same as victory. She looked around the well. That was always an ugly reason to build a ship. I want you to know that I know that. 11 months ago I would have told you I hoped we'd fall through the dark for 4 years and go home having never armed a single weapon. I still wish that had been the deployment we got. It wasn't, said someone quietly. The tactical officer, Okonkwo, a big, slow-spoken man of maybe 30 with a gunner's flat comm. It wasn't, Vandal agreed. So here is the shape of their mistake. The Vel'Shaan are a careful people. Their whole civilization is built on accounting. They don't gamble, they don't improvise, they weigh and they count and they close the books. That carefulness is why they were able to kill our world. They spent 40 years mapping our defenses before they moved, and when they moved they had counted every hull we had. She paused. Every hull they could see. They cannot count what does not radiate. They cannot count 6 ships that have been falling silent through the dark for over a decade. And this is the part I need you to understand. Now that they have closed the account, they will stop counting entirely. A careful people's greatest blindness is the closed book. They have written us down as ended. They will act as though it is true. They will pull their war fleets back to their staging worlds, stand down from alert, reopen the star lanes, and turn their attention to whatever comes after a completed conquest. They will present their backs to a corpse, because corpses do not have fleets. And we do, Okonkwo said. And we do, said Vandal. We have this ship, possibly 5 more. And we have the only thing that has ever mattered in a war, which is that the enemy believes something about us that is false. Wren felt the words go through the well like a current. She watched the stillness on the faces around her change, not into hope exactly. These were not people who had hope left to spend. It changed into something harder and more useful. Purpose. I want to be careful here, Vandal went on, and her voice dropped. Because there is a version of this that I will not command, and I want to say it out loud so that no one in this well ever has to wonder where I stand. We are called planet killers. The name is accurate. This ship carries the means to do to a Vel'Shaan world exactly what was done to Earth, to break its rings, burn its fleets, and put enough fire into its air that it goes dark and cools for 1,000 years. If I gave the order, this ship could read an obituary of its own over a living world, and the conquered would receive it by treaty, and 40 billion Vel'Shaan would learn what our 4 billion learned. She let the silence stretch until it hurt. I will not give that order. Not because I am better than the thing that killed us. On a bad night I am not sure I am. I will not give it because if the only lesson the galaxy learns from humanity's death is that murder answers murder, then the Vel'Shaan were right about us, and we deserve the obituary, and Earth is better off as ash than as the thing that would do to a nursery world what was done to ours. She looked around the well, and her dry riverbed voice was suddenly, briefly, iron. We are not going to murder a world. We are going to prove one wrong. There is a difference, and every one of you is going to have to hold onto that difference with both hands, because the easy thing, the thing your grief is going to whisper to you every ship's night from here to the target, is to forget it. Am I understood? Understood, said the well, in the ragged unison of people who meant it. Wren said it with them and felt the difference land in her like a keel. She had spent 11 months not knowing what the Ceto was for. She had feared in the coffin dark of her alcove that she knew that she was a crewman on a machine built to make a second grave the size of the first. Now she understood that the captain feared it too and had decided against it, and that the deciding was going to be the actual mission, not the weapons, the restraint. Adeyemi, Vandal's eyes found her across the plot. You're the reason we're having this conversation and not a different one. Tell them what you found. Wren straightened. She was the youngest officer in the well by 4 years, and every eye turned to her, and 11 months ago that would have closed her throat. It did not close it now. There was nothing left in her small enough to be afraid of a room. The intercept isn't just an obituary, she said. It's a schedule. When the hegemony closes an account, they publish a demobilization order along with it. It's a legal requirement under their own law, so their client species know the war levy is ending and the lanes are reopening. It's buried in the diplomatic annex, encrypted, but they've used the same annex cipher for 40 years, and I cracked it in the first month of the run practicing on old traffic. She brought the decode up on the plot, and the alien script unspooled beside a human translation she had spent the last 3 hours building. The order names a staging world. The Vel'Shaan call it Ashet-Vel. It's the coreward muster point for the fleet that killed Earth, where they'll bring the ships in, stand them down, cycle the crews home, and warehouse the munitions. Per this order, that begins in 91 days and takes about a month to complete. She looked up. For roughly 30 days, starting 3 months from now, the entire fleet that murdered our world is going to be in one place, powered down, disarmed, and completely certain that nothing in the universe is coming for them. Because we're extinct. The well was very quiet. How far? Okonkwo asked. On a silent trajectory, cold, no fold signature they could track, riding the dark the way we've been riding it. Wren had run this number so many times it lived behind her eyes. 206 days. The silence changed quality. Okonkwo did the arithmetic out loud slowly. The muster starts in 91 days, runs 30, closes at day 121. We can't get there cold until day 206. He looked at the captain. We'd arrive 85 days after the fleet has dispersed and gone home. There's nothing there to prove wrong. It's an empty parade ground. Yes, said Vandal, if we go cold. And there it was. Wren watched the understanding move around the well, and watched the stillness on the faces crack, just slightly, into something that in a less disciplined room would have been horror. Because there was another way to Ashet-Vel. A fast way. The Ceto had a fold drive that could fold the dark into a bruise and cross in 40 days instead of 200. But a fold drive lit a candle in the night that a careful people would see from across the arm. To go fast was to stop being extinct, to announce, in a flare of exotic radiation, that a human warship was alive and moving toward the hegemony's heart. It would trade every advantage the last 11 months of silence had bought, spend the whole treasury of their invisibility, and dare the enemy to gather the very fleet the plan depended on finding scattered. To arrive in time, the corpse would have to sit up and let the galaxy watch it walk. We have 3 months to decide how we cross, Vandal said, and 200 days of dark to do it in either way, and I am not deciding tonight. I am telling you the shape of the country we have to cross. It is long and it is grueling, and every day of it the enemy is going to believe we are dead, and the whole question of this deployment is going to come down to whether we can stay dead long enough to arrive alive. She straightened. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start planning the drive. Dismissed. The officers filed out through the low door into the dark. Wren was the last to move. Vandal caught her at the hatch with a look and held her there a moment, and said quietly, in a voice meant for no one else, 206 days cold, or 40 on fire. The captain's weathered face was unreadable. You're going to spend every one of them wanting me to light the drive, Lieutenant. So am I. Remember tonight when you do. Then she was gone into the dark of her own ship, and Wren Adeyemi stood alone at the hatch of the command well, 26 years old, the youngest officer aboard the only answer a dead world had left, and understood that the war had not ended with the obituary. It had only just found her. The planning took 9 days, and at the end of it the country they had to cross had a map, and the map had a name the crew gave it that Vandal never officially sanctioned and never once corrected. They called it the Long Drive. It was Wren, in the end, who found the road. She was the ship's signals officer, which meant she was also, by the strange collapsing arithmetic of a crew reduced to a fifth of its number, the ship's astrogator's most useful hands. The astrogator was a quiet woman named Soo-Jin Park who had held her post through the whole disaster, and had the drawn look of someone who had not slept a full watch in a year. And between the two of them, they built the thing the captain had asked for. A way to cross 206 days of dark and arrive, cold and silent and unseen, at a world that had helped murder Earth, while the fleet that did the murdering was still gathered there and standing down. The problem was that 206 days cold arrived 85 days too late, and 40 days on fire arrived in time but arrived seen. So they looked for a third road, and Wren found it in the shape of the dark itself. There's a fold, she told the captain and Park on the 10th day, in the astrogation alcove with the plot dimmed to a whisper. Not a drive fold, a natural one, a gravitational lane. She traced it, a faint curved trough through the starfield that ran coreward like a dry watercourse. 2 dead stars, close enough that they've bent the space between them into a channel. Ships don't use it because it's slow at the mouth and there's nothing out there worth reaching. But if you enter it cold at the right vector, the geometry does some of the work a fold drive would do. It's not fast, but it's faster than empty dark, and it radiates nothing, because we're not making the curve. The dead stars made it 1 billion years ago and we're just falling down it. She looked up. It gets us to Ashet-Vel in 131 days. Cold, silent, in time to catch the tail of the muster if we don't waste a day. Park had already checked the math 3 times. It's real, she said simply. It's a hard entry. We have to hit a window 40 minutes wide after 110 days of falling, and if we miss it we're in the dark for another year with no way back. But it's real. Vandal looked at the dry watercourse in the plot for a long time. 131 days, she said, cold, in time. She almost smiled, and it was the most frightening thing Wren had seen her do. You've taken away my excuse, Lieutenant. I was half hoping the numbers would force the drive so I wouldn't have to be the one to choose the hard road. She straightened. All right. We take the trough. We stay cold, we stay dead, plot it both of you, and God help us at the entry window. So the long drive began. It is difficult to describe, to anyone who has not done it, what it costs a crew of human beings to fall silent through the dark for 131 days on purpose, knowing the whole time that a faster road exists and choosing, every single day, not to take it. The Ceto ran cold. That was the discipline, and it was total. No drive. No active sensors. Wren's whole department listened and never spoke, gathering the sky in absolute silence, because a single radar pulse would carry their heartbeat across the dark to a careful people who counted such things. The reactor idled at the floor that kept them breathing and no higher. The ship was cold enough that frost bloomed in the outer compartments, and the crew wore their cold suits on watch. There was no artificial gravity beyond the slow tumble Park put on the hull to keep everyone's blood from pooling, so they lived in a permanent gentle fall, and the falling got into everything, into the 6-note melody from the aft berthing, into the way people held their coffee cups, into Wren's dreams, which were all, that whole long autumn of the run, dreams of falling towards something she could not see. And the crew grieved. That was the part the planning could not schedule. For 11 months they had grieved in the abstract, an extinction too large to hold, and now the obituary had made it real and legal and published, and something in the human machinery of mourning shifted from denial into the long gray middle where grief does its actual work. Men who had held together through the coolant failure came apart quietly in the dark. A gunner's mate stopped eating. A comms tech Wren had trained beside began waking the whole berthing with the sound she made in her sleep, and then stopped sleeping, and then had to be put into the freeze beside the other two, so that the count of living human beings aboard the Ceto dropped from 190 to 187, and every one of those three was a person Wren had known. She learned, in those weeks, the thing that Vandal had been trying to warn her about at the hatch. She learned how badly she wanted the captain to light the drive. It came at her in the third watch in the small hours of the ship's night, when she sat in her coffin-sized alcove listening to a sky full of Vel'Shaan traffic she could decode but never answer. She could hear them. That was the torture of the signals post. The hegemony believed humanity extinct, and so they had stopped encrypting their routine chatter on the coreward lanes, and Wren spent her watches listening to the murderers of her world discuss cargo schedules and crew rotations, and the reopening of the star lanes in the flat, contented tones of a people who had closed an account and moved on. She heard a Vel'Shaan freighter master complain about a docking fee at Ashet-Vel. She heard a factory ship report that it had finished breaking down the last of the captured human orbital platforms for scrap. She heard, once, a client-species diplomat make a joke about humans that she understood perfectly, and that was not even cruel. It was worse than cruel. It was casual, the way one might joke about a weather system that had passed. And every night the drive sat 40 days from the Vel'Shaan heart, and every night Wren did the arithmetic that grief does. 40 days. She could put a human warship into the middle of that contented traffic in 40 days. She could make them stop joking. She could make the whole arm remember, in a single flare of exotic light, that the account was not closed. And every night she remembered the captain in the command well, saying if the only lesson the galaxy learns from humanity's death is that murder answers murder, then the Vel'Shaan were right about us. And every night she chose the trough over the fire, the way the whole ship was choosing it. 187 people falling silently down a dry watercourse in the dark, holding a difference in both hands. It nearly broke on day 68. Wren was on the bridge watch, the shallow bridge, the emergency con near the hull that they manned when the deep command well was cold to save power, when the passive array caught something and her whole department went rigid in the dark. A ship Vel'Shaan close. Contact, she breathed, the way you breathe when the enemy is near enough that even a whisper feels loud. Bearing coreward low, range 4 light seconds and closing. It's a picket. Hegemony hull military transponder, she stopped. Her blood had gone cold in a way the cold suit could not fix. It's on our lane, Captain. It's a picket sweeping the trough. Vandal came onto the shallow bridge in her stocking feet, silent, and stood behind Wren's station reading the plot. Okonkwo was already there, and his big slow hands were very still on the weapons repeater. The picket was small, a system defense corvette, nothing that could hurt a Leviathan, but that was not the danger and everyone on the bridge knew it. The danger was that it was here at all, sweeping a dead watercourse that Wren had chosen precisely because no one had a reason to sweep it. If it caught a whisper of them, a warm patch on the hull and outgassing, a single reflected star, it would not need to fight them. It would only need to live long enough to send one pulse coreward, and the obituary would be revised, and the fleet at Ashet-Vel would not stand down, and everything the long drive had bought would be spent in an instant. It hasn't seen us, Wren said, very low, watching the picket's own emissions. It's running a routine scan pattern, it's not hunting. It doesn't know we're here, it can't. We're cold. She swallowed. But its next scan leg brings it to 1,100 kilometers off our beam in about 9 minutes. If we're radiating anything at all when it gets that close, its passive array will find us. Options, Vandal said. Not to Wren, to the bridge. We can kill it, Okonkwo said quietly. One shot from the forward mount before it gets a pulse off. Odds are good. Odds are good, Vandal repeated. And if the odds are the bad ones, if it gets a single pulse off before it dies? Okonkwo was silent. He was a gunner. He knew what a single pulse cost. And even if we kill it clean, Vandal went on, a picket that stops reporting is a picket that a careful people come looking for. We would trade a certainty of discovery for a probability of it, and buy ourselves a week of grace before this whole lane fills with hunters. She shook her head. No, we don't fire. Adeyemi, tell me how we hide from something 1,100 kilometers off our beam with nothing but the dark. And Wren Adeyemi, 26 years old, felt the entire weight of the long drive come down onto the thing she knew that no one else on the bridge knew as well as she did. The exact shape of what a Vel'Shaan passive array could and could not hear. We go colder, she said, all the way to the floor. Reactor to survival minimum. We stop heating the outer hull entirely, we let the compartments freeze, we shut down every system that isn't keeping us breathing. We turn the hull so our narrowest cross-section faces its scan leg, and we present it the coldest, deadest angle we have. And we drift. She was already moving, keying the orders her department needed. It's built to find warm ships that are trying not to be found. It is not built to find a 9-kilometer piece of frozen iron falling down a dead lane, because a careful people already counted all the warm ships and closed the book. We don't hide from its array, Captain. We hide inside its certainty. It's not really looking because it already knows we're extinct. We just have to be colder than its confidence. Vandal looked at her for 1/2 second longer than the situation should have allowed. Then she said, "Do it," and the Ceto began to die on purpose. They took her down to the floor. The reactor throttled to the barest whisper that would keep 187 people alive, and every other system went dark, and the outer hull, already cold, began to fall toward the temperature of the dark itself. Wren gave the orders in a voice she kept flat and low, and around her the bridge crew moved with the terrible economy of people who understood that the next 9 minutes would decide whether their species had a future or an obituary, and that the only weapon that mattered in those 9 minutes was their own capacity to be still. The compartments froze. Frost climbed the bulkheads. Somewhere aft the 6-note melody stopped and did not start again, and the silence it left was the loudest thing on the ship. The picket came on. Wren watched it in the passive plot, a mote of Vel'Shaan warmth crossing the dark, and she stopped breathing when it crossed onto the scan leg that would bring it to 1,100 kilometers off the Ceto's frozen beam. She could hear it scan now, not as sound, but as a rhythm in the passive array, the soft, regular pulse of a machine sweeping the dark with the bored thoroughness of a watchman on a beat it had walked 1,000 times and never once found anything on. 1,100 kilometers. In the cosmic scale it was nothing, a hand's breadth. The picket was so close that Wren could resolve the individual heat sources of its drive, could have counted its crew by their compartments if she'd wanted to. It was close enough that if a single air handler on the Ceto had kicked on, if a single crewman had run warm, if the reactor had so much as flickered above the floor, the picket's array would have caught it, and the war would have restarted in that instant. The Ceto fell past it, frozen, silent, dead. The picket's scan rhythm did not change, not by a beat. It swept its dead lane with the same bored thoroughness, found the same nothing it had found on every leg of its patrol, and continued coreward on its pattern, a careful watchman certain that the account was closed, falling away 4 light seconds, 8, 12, until it was only a mote again, and then only a whisper, and then gone. For a long moment, no one on the shallow bridge moved. Then Vandal let out a breath and said, in her dry riverbed voice, Bring her back up to the run floor, Lieutenant. Slowly. And log it. On day 68 of the long drive, this ship hid from the enemy inside his own certainty and did not have to kill anyone to do it. She put one hand briefly on Wren's shoulder, the only time in the whole deployment she ever did, and said more quietly so only Wren heard it, "That's the mission. Right there. Not the guns, that." Wren nodded. She could not speak. Her hands were shaking now that the stillness was no longer required of them, and she let them shake, and she brought the ship carefully back from the edge of the dark she had walked it to. That night in her coffin-sized alcove, she listened to the coreward traffic again, and heard the picket file a routine report, patrol complete, lane clear, nothing to note, and understood for the first time all the way down what the captain had meant about the closed book. The most dangerous thing about the enemy was not their fleet, it was their certainty. And the whole strange, grueling, silent art of the long drive was the art of feeding that certainty, letting it grow fat, hiding a planet killer inside it, so that when the corpse finally sat up, it would not sit up in the empty dark where no one was watching. It would sit up in the one place, at the one moment, where the whole galaxy would have to see. 63 days remained to the entry window. And Wren Adeyemi, falling down a dead watercourse toward the heart of the people who had written her species' obituary, found that somewhere in the cold and the grief and the 9 minutes of being colder than the enemy's confidence, the girl who had come aboard, sure that nothing would ever happen, had finished dying, and the officer who remained had stopped wanting the drive. She wanted now to arrive. The entry window came on day 110, and it very nearly killed them all. Wren had known it would be hard. Park had told her from the beginning that hitting a 40-minute window after 110 days of cold falling was a hard entry, and she had believed the words without understanding them, the way you believe a warning about a fire you have never been burned by. She understood them now. The trough narrowed as it approached the 2 dead stars, and the space inside it grew steep and treacherous, and to fall down it correctly the Ceto had to thread a gravitational needle at a velocity that had accumulated over 110 days of unpowered fall, with no drive to correct a mistake, because to light the drive at the mouth of the trough, so close to the coreward lanes, was to light a candle a careful people could not fail to see. They had to hit the window on ballistics alone, on the vectors Wren and Park had computed 110 days ago, trusting arithmetic done in the first week of the run to survive 4 months of the small perturbations of the dark. It did not quite survive. "We're off," Park said, 60 minutes out, in a voice that had gone very flat. "Coreward drift. A dead star we didn't have good mass data on. It's pulled us. We're going to enter the window 900 kilometers coreward of our plot and about 4 meters per second hot." She looked up, and the fear in her face was the disciplined fear of someone doing the math even as she reported it. "At that entry, we don't fall down the trough. We clip the steep wall of it and get thrown out of the lane, off the plot, into open dark on a vector that misses Ashet-Vel by 9 light days and takes us there a year late, if we survive the wall at all." The shallow bridge was silent. "Correction options," Vandal said. 1, said Park, "a drive burn. 2 seconds, 100th of what a fold would cost, just enough to trim the vector and drop us into the window clean." She swallowed. "It's a candle, Captain, a small one, but it's a candle 60 minutes from the coreward lanes, and I can't promise you no one sees it." And there it was again, the whole war compressed into a single choice, the way it had been compressed into the 9 minutes with the picket, the fire, or the dark. Except this time the dark did not mean hiding. This time the dark meant missing the window, missing the muster, missing the entire reason 187 people had fallen silently through 4 months of grief. This time the cold road did not lead to survival. It led to arriving too late to matter, to a corpse that sat up in an empty parade ground with no one there to be proven wrong. Wren watched the captain's face and understood that Vandal was weighing the exact thing she had promised she would not do, light the drive, spend the invisibility, dare the enemy to see, and understood, too, that the captain had promised no such thing about a 2-second burn to save the mission itself. The promise had been about murder. This was about arrival. There was a difference, and the whole deployment had been an education in holding the difference in both hands. "Adeyemi," Vandal said, "you know their arrays better than anyone alive on this ship. If we burn 2 seconds here, what sees it?" Wren was already deep in the passive plot, tearing through everything her department had gathered in 110 days of listening. "The coreward lanes are that way," she said, "and there's traffic on them, but the dead stars are between us and the lanes. The burn would be shadowed. The exotic flare would have to bend around a stellar mass to reach any hull that could report it. The picket lanes are quiet. That corvette from day 68 went home. There's a listening post at the trough's coreward mouth, but it's passive. It's built to hear drives running for hours, and a 2-second trim burn at this range reads as—" She stopped, and heard her own voice change as she found the answer. "It reads as a micrometeorite strike. Captain, at 2 seconds in this geometry, the flare signature is inside the noise band their own instruments file as debris impacts. They log 1,000 of them a day. It's not a candle. It's a spark, and it's a spark shaped exactly like the kind of spark they've already taught themselves to ignore." Vandal looked at her for a half-second. "Then, you're certain?" "No," Wren said, because she would not lie on a bridge, not about this. "I'm as certain as 110 days of listening can make me. It's the best read I have, and if we don't burn, we miss the window for sure." "Then we burn," said Vandal. "Park trim vector 2 seconds on Adeyemi's shadow. The rest of you, we are about to make the only fire this ship has made in 4 months, and we are going to make it as small as a rock hitting a rock, and then we are going to fall down that trough like the corpse we're pretending to be. Execute." The burn was the strangest 2 seconds of Wren's life. After 130 days of absolute cold, the drive lit. A sound she felt in her teeth, a shudder through 9 kilometers of frozen hull, a brief impossible warmth, and then it was gone and the Ceto was falling again, silent, trimmed, dropping toward the window on a corrected vector. Wren stood frozen at her station with every sense poured into the passive array, waiting for the thing that would tell her she had been wrong. A query pulse from the listening post, a challenge, a change in the coreward traffic that meant a spark had been seen and understood. It did not come. The listening post at the mouth of the trough logged something. She saw the faint acknowledgement ripple through its housekeeping channel, and filed it, and moved on, exactly the way a careful people file the 1,000th debris impact of the day, and said nothing to anyone, because the account was closed and rocks hit rocks and the humans were extinct. The Ceto fell into the window with 90 seconds to spare, and dropped into the trough, and began the last 21 days of the long drive down a gravitational watercourse that would deliver her, cold and silent and unseen, to the heart of the people who had killed her world. They found the second ship on day 119. Wren caught it first, a whisper in the passive array so faint she thought at first it was a ghost in her own tired instruments, a modulation in the background that did not belong to any Vel'Shaan signature she had catalogued in 4 months of listening. It was cold, it was silent, it was falling. And it was riding a trough of its own, a different dead watercourse that ran alongside theirs and would converge with it a few light hours ahead. And when Wren pulled the whisper apart and ran it against the archive, her heart stopped, because the modulation was a key. A human key. A recognition cipher from the Leviathan program, older than the war, dead simple and dead quiet, a single repeated pattern that meant nothing to anyone in the galaxy except the 5 other hulls and their crews. "Captain," she said, and her voice was not flat now, "there's another one, a Leviathan. It's on a converging trough and it's squawking recognition, so faint you'd only hear it if you already knew the key, which means it's doing exactly what we're doing, staying dead but leaving one door open for family." She looked up, and for the first time in 119 days there was something in her chest that was not grief. We're not alone. At least one of them made it. And it's on the same road we are, headed for the same place. Because of course it is. They read the same obituary, they cracked the same annex, they found the same muster. Captain, they're going to Ashet-Vel too. The bridge was very quiet, and then Okonkwo, the big slow gunner, laughed. One short surprised sound, the first laugh Wren had heard on the Ceto in months, and said, "Two planet killers walk into a muster." "Belay that," said Vandal, but there was something in her dry voice that had not been there before either. "Adeyemi, can you talk to it without lighting a candle?" "We can whisper," Wren said. "Same way it's whispering. Tight cold on the recognition key, spread so thin across the dark that only a ship already listening for it could pull it out. It'll take hours to pass anything real, but yes. I can talk to it." "Then find out who they are," Vandal said, "and where the other four are, and whether any of them have had the sense to build a plan. Because if there are two of us falling toward that muster in the dark, then in about 12 days there is going to be a conversation between planet killers about exactly what we do when we get there. And I want that conversation started before we can see the enemy's homeworld with our own eyes." So Wren spent the last stretch of the long drive doing the thing she had trained her whole short career for, and had never once imagined doing in earnest. She talked, in whispers so cold and thin they lived inside the noise of the dead stars, to the survivors of the same extinction, and slowly, over days, the picture assembled itself out of the black. The second ship was the Tiamat, and she had lost more of her crew than the Ceto had, 161 living, her captain among the dead, commanded now by a first officer even younger than Vandal, who had held his ship together through a reactor scram that should have killed it. He had cracked the annex cipher independently. He had found the muster independently. He had chosen the dark over the drive independently, for the same reasons and after the same arguments, and when Wren passed him the captain's difference, "We are not going to murder a world, we are going to prove one wrong," he passed back, after a long cold silence, a single line that Vandal ordered logged verbatim. "We had the same fight aboard the Tiamat. We came to the same answer. Tell your captain she is not the only human being out here holding onto it with both hands." Of the other four, they learned only fragments, and the fragments were mostly graves. The Kraken had died in the first hour of the war, caught fueling at her hidden station. The Vel'Shaan had found one Leviathan after all, and never known there were 6. The Yermangander had gone silent on her drift 2 years before the war and never been heard from again, lost to the dark in some accident no one would ever witness. The Bahamut answered no whisper on any key, and after days of listening they stopped expecting her to. But the 6th ship, the Fenris, answered on day 125. A third cold whisper from a third dead trough, 144 living aboard, another young officer in a dead captain's chair, another independent journey down another dry watercourse toward the same closed account. 3 of 6, converging in the dark on the world where the fleet that killed Earth was standing down and going home, each of them having made, alone, the same grueling choice to stay dead long enough to arrive alive. 3 planet killers, 27 kilometers of armored dark, 492 human beings, the confirmed living remainder of a species declared extinct, falling silent toward Ashet-Vel with 6 days left on the muster, and the whole galaxy certain the account was closed. On day 129, they saw the world for the first time. Ashet-Vel resolved in the passive array as the Ceto fell the last stretch of the trough toward the Vel'Shaan heart, and Wren, who had listened to this place for 4 months without ever seeing it, finally saw the shape of what they had crossed the dark to reach, and it was worse and better and more complicated than any of them had let themselves imagine. The muster was real. The plot filled slowly with it as the passive array drank the light of the coreward system, the fleet that had killed Earth, gathered in orbit over a living world, exactly as the demobilization order had promised. Wren counted them and made herself keep counting past the point where her hands wanted to stop. The great capital hulls that had broken Earth's orbital rings, powered down now, drives cold, weapons stood down, holding station in the bored certainty of a fleet that had won and gone home. Support ships. Munitions haulers being emptied into orbital warehouses. Crew tenders cycling the murderers of her world down to the surface for the leave they had earned. The whole apparatus of a completed conquest, disarmed and dispersed and utterly, perfectly unafraid, because nothing in the universe was coming for them. The account was closed. And below it all, the world. That was the part that changed the shape of everything. Ashet-Vel was not a fortress. It was not a war world. It was a home, a green-gold living planet crowded with light on its night side, 40 billion Vel'Shaan, cities and oceans, and the ordinary radiance of a civilization at peace, orbital habitats where children were born, farm platforms, a hospital station the size of a small moon whose emissions Wren's array read as clearly as a heartbeat. The staging world for the fleet that murdered Earth was also, and mostly, simply a place where a great many people lived who had never fired a shot at anyone, who had heard the obituary read on the required channel and mourned briefly, as instructed, and gone back to their lives. Wren looked at the two things in the plot, the disarmed fleet of murderers and the crowded innocent world beneath it, and felt the whole weight of what the Ceto was land on her at once. She was standing on a planet killer. She had crossed 129 days of dark to reach this exact geometry. And she understood, looking at the green-gold world crowded with light, precisely why Captain Vandal had made them all say the difference out loud in the command well on the first night, and precisely how easy it would be, with grief for a keel and a magazine full of the means, to forget it. Vandal came onto the shallow bridge and stood beside her, and looked at the plot for a long time without speaking. "There it is," the captain said at last, "the fleet that killed us, cold, disarmed, and asleep, and a world full of people underneath it who don't know we're alive." She was quiet a moment. "This is the country we crossed the dark to reach, Lieutenant. Now comes the hard part, which was never the crossing. Get me the Tiamat and the Fenris. It's time for the planet killers to decide what kind of ships they are." The council of the three ships happened in whispers across 4 light towers of dark, and it took 2 full days, and it was the closest the human race came, in that whole long war, to reading a second obituary of its own. They could not meet. 3 planet killers could not gather in one place without lighting the very fire the long drive had spent everything to avoid, and so the captains conferred the only way they could, through Wren's department, in cold, thin whispers spread across the noise, hours between each exchange, a conversation conducted at the speed of restraint. Wren sat at the center of it, the youngest officer on the Ceto, translating the will of one dead captain's chair to another, and because she sat at the center she heard everything, including the thing that nearly broke them. The Fenris wanted to burn the world. Not all of the Fenris. Her acting master, a young officer named Cho, held the same difference Vandal held and said so. But the Fenris had lost her captain and her exec and a third of her crew, and the officer who ran her tactical section, a man named Reyes, older than Cho, a survivor of the ecliptic who had watched the home fleet die from a scout ship and carried the memory like a splinter in the brain. Reyes had crossed 130 days of dark with one idea holding him upright, and the idea was symmetry. "They read our world's obituary," he whispered across the dark, in words Wren transcribed with hands that wanted to shake. "Now we read theirs. 40 billion for 4 billion. The fleet is disarmed. We will never have this shot again, and we 3 carry enough to do to Ashet-Vel exactly what they did to Earth. Anything less than that is mercy we did not receive and do not owe. Let the conquered record a second extinction on the required channel, and let the whole arm learn what it costs to murder a species. That is justice. That is the only justice the dead can still be given." Wren transcribed it and passed it to the captain, and watched Vandal read it in the dim light of the shallow bridge, and saw the terrible thing that crossed the captain's weathered face, which was not disagreement. It was recognition. "He's not wrong that we'll never have this shot again," Vandal said quietly. "He's not wrong that they'd deserve it under any law they'd recognize. He's not wrong about the symmetry." She set the transcript down. "That's what makes him dangerous, Lieutenant. He's not a monster. He's a grieving man doing correct arithmetic, and correct arithmetic is how you get a murdered world to murder one back and call it justice all the way down." She was silent a moment. "Get me Cho, privately. Fenris to Ceto only, off the shared whisper. I need to know if her captain still commands her, or if her tactical section does." That was the 2 days. While the muster at Ashet-Vel ran down its last hours, crews cycling to the surface, munitions emptying into warehouses, the great cold hulls holding their unafraid station, 3 young officers in 3 dead captains' chairs argued, across 4 light hours of dark, about whether the survivors of an extinction would become the thing that had made them. Wren carried the argument. It was her voice in whispers that passed Vandal's difference to the Fenris again and again. "We are not going to murder a world. We are going to prove one wrong." And it was her instruments that caught on the second night, the thing that ended the argument, not with a speech, but with the truth. She had been listening to Ashet-Vel for days, cataloging the muster, and in the cataloging she had drifted, the way a signals officer drifts, into the ordinary traffic of the world below. And she had found the hospital station. It was the size of a small moon, and it broadcast on an open medical channel that the Vel'Shaan, certain of their safety, had never bothered to encrypt, and Wren, who could decode Vel'Shaan as easily as her own tongue after 4 months in the coffin dark, had begun, without quite meaning to listen to it. It was where the sick of Ashet-Vel came. It was where the Vel'Shaan were born. And on the second night of the council, at the hour when Ray's arithmetic was closest to carrying the Fenris, Wren did something she had never been ordered to do and could not fully have explained. She opened the hospital channel onto the shared whisper and let all 3 ships hear it. She did not translate. She only let it play, the ordinary sounds of a place where 40 billion people's lives began and ended, the medical chatter, the birth registration scrolling past in the flat maternal cadence of an administrative channel, a Vel'Shaan voice reciting the names of the newly born on Ashet-Vel the way. Such a voice recited them every hour of every day, dozens of them, hundreds, an unbroken litany of small new lives that had done nothing to Earth and knew nothing of it and would, in about a day, be under the guns of 3 human warships that had crossed the dark to decide whether they lived. Wren let it play for a long time. Then she keyed the whisper and said, in her own voice, to all 3 ships and every officer in every dead captain's chair, "That's the world under the fleet. I've been listening to it for 4 days. Those are the people Ray's wants to give the obituary." She paused, and her voice did not shake, because there was nothing left in her small enough to shake. "I want to be honest with the Fenris because you crossed the same dark we did and you earned honesty. When I sit in my alcove at ship's night, I want to burn them too. I want it so badly some watches I can taste it. 4 billion of hours are ash, and these people slept through it, and their fleet is asleep right now over their heads, and I could give the order and make the whole galaxy remember us. I feel every gram of what Ray's feels." She let that sit. "And that's exactly why we can't let him command. Not because he's wrong about the arithmetic, because the arithmetic is the trap. The Vel'Shaan did correct arithmetic too. They weighed us and counted us and closed the account, and they were careful and rational and certain the whole way down, and it ended with a channel full of newborn names on a world they were about to burn. If we do the same math, we don't avenge Earth. We prove the Vel'Shaan were right to close the book. We become the reason the obituary was justified." Her voice dropped. "There are 492 of us left. We are the last of what humanity gets to decide it was. I don't want the last human decision in the galaxy to be that we were exactly as good at murder as the people who murdered us. Let it be something else. Let it be the one thing they never counted on, because it's the one thing that isn't in the arithmetic. Let it be that a corpse sat up and looked its killers in the eye and chose not to become them. The whisper was silent for a long time. 4 light towers of dark, and the newborn names of Ashet-Vel scrolling past on the open channel, and 492 human beings listening in 3 frozen ships. Then the Fenris answered, and it was Cho's key, not Ray's, and it said, "The Fenris stands with the Ceto. Give us the plan." And Vandal, standing behind Wren in the dim light of the shallow bridge, said nothing at all for a moment. Then she put her hand on the back of Wren's chair and said, "Lo, when this is over, Lieutenant, remind me to tell you what I was going to do if the Fenris had gone the other way. It was worse than anything Ray's proposed, and you just saved me from having to do it." She straightened. "Now, let's build the thing we actually came here to do." The plan they built was not an attack. That was the whole genius of it, and it was Wren's in the end, because Wren was the one who understood better than anyone alive what the enemy could and could not see, and what they had taught themselves to believe. The Vel'Shaan were certain of 2 things: that humanity was extinct, and that nothing could reach Ashet-Vel unseen. The long drive had already proven the second false. 3 planet killers had done exactly that. But the enemy did not know it yet, and the power of that ignorance was the only weapon that mattered. If the Ceto and her sisters simply opened fire, they would kill some ships and prove the obituary wrong in the crudest possible way, and the Vel'Shaan would learn the lesson of Ray's. That murder answers murder, and the arm is a place where the strong burn the weak and call it an account. That lesson would echo down 1,000 years, and it would make the galaxy worse, and it would make Earth's death mean nothing but the beginning of a longer killing. So they would not open fire. They would do something the Vel'Shaan, for all their careful arithmetic, had no defense against at all, because it had never once occurred to them that it might be necessary. They would let themselves be seen, on purpose, all 3 of them at once at the moment of maximum meaning. 3 planet killers would rise out of the dark in the middle of the disarmed fleet, close enough to end it, weapons hot and locked, and every capital hull in the muster inside their killing envelope with no time to power up and no chance to run. And then they would not fire. They would hold. They would put themselves in the one position in the universe from which the murder of Ashet-Vel was not only possible but easy, undeniable, seconds away. And they would stop there, in full view of 40 billion people and the whole watching Concord. And they would prove, with the guns silent and the world still turning below, that humanity had crossed the dark with the means and the reason and the right to burn a world, and had chosen not to. That was the obituary they would answer. Not with a second grave, with a demonstration that the first graves diggers had been wrong about the thing they were most certain of, not that humanity could survive, though it had, but about what humanity was. "They said we ceased," Vandal said, looking at the plot where 3 cold motes fell toward a sleeping fleet. "They said we earned no long grief. They closed the book and they told 200 worlds the matter of the humans was settled." Her dry voice was very quiet. "We are going to reopen the book in front of all of them, and we are going to write the last line ourselves. And the last line is going to be that when the murdered had the murderer's own throat under the knife, the murdered put the knife down, not because they were weak and not because they forgave, but because they refused to prove the obituary right." She turned to Wren. "Give me the timing, Lieutenant. When does the corpse sit up?" Wren had the answer. She had had it for hours since the plan first took shape, because it was a signals problem at its heart, and signals was the only thing she had left that was entirely hers. "The muster's last act is a Concord broadcast," she said. "It's in the demobilization order. When a war levy ends, the flagship transmits a formal notice of victory on the required channel, the same channel that carried our obituary, so the whole arm receives it at once. It's a legal closing of the account. They're scheduled to transmit it in 19 hours from the flag hull over the required channel to 200 worlds." She looked up, and something in her that had been falling through the dark for 130 days finally found its footing. That's when we rise. Not before, not after. We come up out of the dark in the middle of their fleet at the exact moment their flagship is telling 200 worlds that the matter of the humans is closed, and we let every one of those worlds watch the corpse sit up on the same channel in the same instant while the killers are still saying the word extinct. We don't answer the obituary later, Captain. We answer it live, on their channel, in front of everyone. Mid-sentence. For a long moment the shallow bridge was silent. Then Okonkwo, the big slow gunner, let out a breath that was almost a laugh, and Vandal looked at the plot with the closest thing to peace Wren had seen on her face in 130 days and said, 19 hours, all ships, all hands, we've been dead long enough. She put her hand once more on the back of Wren's chair. Wake the ship, Lieutenant, quietly. It's time to arrive. The last 19 hours of the long drive were the strangest of all, because, for the first time in 130 days, the Ceto came alive. Not loud, not yet, but warm. Wren felt it happen around her as she moved through the ship on the captain's orders, the reactor coming up off the survival floor by careful increments, the frost retreating from the bulkheads, the compartments they had let freeze for 4 months breathing back toward the temperature of a living thing. The crew came up with the ship. Cold suits came off. The 2 who had survived the freeze, no, 3. They woke the comms tech, the one Wren had trained beside, because Vandal would not leave a single human being asleep for this, came blinking into a ship that had decided, after 4 months of playing dead, to be a planet killer in earnest. And in the aft berthing, quietly, someone began to play the 6-note melody again, and this time it did not stop. It spread. By the 12th hour it was coming from 3 compartments, and by the 15th someone had put words under it that no one had ever heard before, a low, rough tune passing hand to hand through a warming ship, and Wren caught only fragments as she moved. We fell so far. We fell so cold. We did not break, and understood that the crew was writing, in real time, the thing that a species writes when it discovers it is not extinct after all. She found the captain on the command well, the deep one, lit for the first time in months, and took her station at the signal's repeater, and around her the 11 watch officers. No, 14 now, the frozen ones woken and standing among them, assembled at the plot where 3 cold motes fell toward a sleeping fleet. Status, Vandal said. Tiamat and Fenris on plot and on timeline, Wren reported. All 3 ships will breach the muster envelope within 4 seconds of each other. Weapons will be hot and locked on every capital hull in the fleet at breach. And Captain, she brought the required channel up, the conquered channel that had carried the obituary. The flag hull is warming its transmitter. They're getting ready to send the victory notice. We have about 40 minutes. Then we have about 40 minutes, said Vandal, and then this ship does the only thing it was ever built to do, and I intend for it to be the opposite of what it was built for. She looked around the well. I'm not going to make a speech. You've all heard the difference and you've all held on to it, and in 40 minutes you're going to hold on to it in front of 40 billion strangers and 200 worlds while every instinct in your grief screams at you to let the guns speak. So I'll only say this. Her dry riverbed voice went very quiet. They read our names into the dark and called the matter closed. In 40 minutes we are going to make them look at us, not so they'll fear us. So they'll know, and so the whole watching arm will know exactly what they weighed and exactly what they got wrong. Stations. The 40 minutes fell away like the last of the trough. At the 20th minute the flag hull's transmitter went to full power, and the required channel opened, and a Vel'Shaan herald, not the same one, but the same flat ceremonial cadence, the same lowered 4 eyes, the same posture for the reading of an account, began, across 200 worlds, to speak the closing words of the war that had killed Earth. Wren put it on the well speakers. She wanted the crew to hear it. She wanted them to hold their grief in both hands at the exact moment they proved it could be held. Let it be recorded across the conquered of worlds, the herald said. That the levy of Ashet-Vel is discharged, the fleet stood down, and the star lanes reopened. The hegemony has completed the matter it undertook. The species designated human is ended, its account is closed, and the— "Now," said Captain Vandal. And the corpse sat up. 3 planet killers rose out of the dark in the middle of the sleeping fleet, and Wren felt the Ceto come to her full and terrible life around her. Not the drive. They were already inside the envelope. But everything else, every system that had lain cold and silent for 130 days waking at once, the great hull warming and lighting and turning its 9 kilometers of armored dark to present the muster with the thing no Vel'Shaan array had counted. Because a careful people only count what they can see, the passive plot became active in a single instant. Every gun on 3 human warships came hot and locked. Every capital hull in the fleet that killed Earth, cold, disarmed, crews half of them planetside on leave, drives dark, unafraid, found itself, without warning, inside the killing envelope of ships it had proven did not exist. Wren watched it happen on the enemy's own channels, because she had left them all open, and she would remember it for the rest of her life. The herald stopped mid-word. On the required channel, in front of 200 worlds, at the exact instant the word extinct hung unfinished in the air, the flat ceremonial cadence broke into something Wren had never heard from a Vel'Shaan and had crossed the dark to cause, not fear at first, confusion. The confusion of a careful people encountering, for the first time in their long accounting history, a number that could not be true. The muster's channels erupted, alarms that had not sounded in a year. A flag officer's voice, stripped of all ceremony, demanding identification from contacts that could not be there. And then, as 3 human warships settled into the geometry of certain death over the disarmed fleet, weapons locked, seconds from ending everything, the confusion became the thing Wren had promised the Council she would make the galaxy feel. Shock, the full, undefended shock of a people who had closed a book and were watching live on the channel of their own triumph. The corpse opened its eyes. "They're hailing," Wren said. Her voice was steady. "All of them. The flag, the muster, the surface, the conquered relays. Everyone on the required channel just watched us appear inside a fleet they told the arm we couldn't threaten because we didn't exist. The flag officer is offering surrender, Captain. Unconditional, he thinks." She read it again to be sure. "He thinks we're here to do to Ashet-Vel what they did to Earth. The whole world is going to alert. There are 40 billion people down there, and every one of them just learned in the same second that they're extinct, and we're not, and we're holding their throat under the knife." She looked up. "He's begging, Captain, on the open channel, in front of 200 worlds. The murderer of Earth is begging the corpse for the world's life." The command well was utterly silent. On the plot, 3 human warships held over a disarmed fleet, weapons hot, the world green and gold, and crowded with light turning slowly below. 40 billion lives and the whole watching arm hanging on what the last of humanity would do with the thing it had crossed the dark to reach. This was the moment. Wren understood it completely. This was the moment Rays had wanted, the moment the arithmetic had been building toward the whole long drive. 40 billion for 4 billion, the symmetry complete, the obituary answered with an obituary, the account balanced in fire. Every gun was locked. Every hull was helpless. It would take 4 seconds. And the whole galaxy was watching on the required channel, and would record whatever came next into 10,000 archives, and teach it to children who had never seen a human face. Captain Ilse Vandal stood at the center of the well and looked at the world below, and did not give the order to fire. "Open the channel," she said instead. "The required one. Put me on it. Let the whole arm hear the answer to the obituary." She looked at Wren. "You cracked their cipher 130 days ago, Lieutenant. Give me their channel one more time. And then get ready to translate. Because I want every one of the 40 billion people on that world, and every soul on the 200 worlds watching, to understand exactly what a human being is choosing right now, in their own tongue, so that no herald can ever tell them it was anything else. Wren opened the channel, and Captain Vandal spoke to the galaxy that had buried her species, and her dry riverbed voice went out on the same frequency, in the same instant that had carried humanity's obituary, and it did not tremble. To the hegemony, to the conquered, to the 40 billion people of Ashet-Vel, and to every world receiving this, she said, while Wren's translation went out beneath it in flawless Vel'Shaan. I am the master of the human warship Ceto, one of 3 you were told did not exist. You read our extinction into the dark. You told 200 worlds our account was closed. You were so certain of it that you brought the fleet that murdered our world here to disarm, and you never once looked behind you, because a careful people do not check the arithmetic on a corpse. She let it hang. On the surface, on the channels, 40 billion people held their breath. We are inside your fleet. Your capital hulls are cold and your guns are dark, and there is nothing between this ship and the end of your world. We carry the means. We have the reason. Every law your hegemony would recognize would call it just. And I want every soul on every world receiving this to understand, before I say what I am about to say, that the murder of Ashet-Vel is not merely possible for us right now. It is easy. It is 4 seconds away. It is the thing you would do in our place, and call it an account closed. The world below was utterly silent. We are not going to do it. Wren heard her own translation go out under the captain's words, and heard, on the surface channels, the sound of 40 billion people receiving them. Not a cheer, not yet. Something more like the vast indrawn breath of a civilization that had been ready to die. We are not going to burn your children into the dark and read you an obituary and teach the galaxy that murder answers murder, Vandal said. Not because we forgive you. We do not, and we may never. Not because we are weak. You can see from where I am speaking exactly how weak we are. We are refusing because you were wrong about us, and I intend for the whole arm to know precisely how wrong. You weighed us and you found a species you thought would answer extinction with extinction, and so you thought it safe to make us extinct. You were wrong. We are the thing your accounting could not count and never will, the number that does not balance, the corpse that sits up and puts the knife down. Look at us, hegemony. Look at what you told 200 worlds was ended. This is what you murdered. Now that you can see it live on the channel of your own victory, was it ended? Was the matter of the humans ever closed at all? She let the silence stretch across 200 worlds. Stand your fleet down further. Keep it cold. We are going to withdraw into the dark we came out of, and you are never going to know from where, because you never did. But you will know we are here. The whole arm will know now that humanity crossed the dark to your heart with every reason and every means to end you, and chose your world's life over its own grief. Carry that. Teach it to your children instead of our obituary. And the next time a careful people sits down to weigh whether a species can be safely made extinct, remember Ashet-Vel, and remember that you cannot count what we are, and you never could. Her voice dropped 1 final degree. The matter of the humans is not closed. We closed it ourselves just now in front of all of you. Ceto out. She cut the channel. For a long moment no one in the command well moved or breathed. On the plot, 3 human warships held over a disarmed fleet in a living world, guns hot, the moment balanced on a knife. Then Vandal said, quietly, "Weapons safe. All ships. Take us home into the dark," and Okonkwo's big slow hands moved across the repeater, and one by one the locks came off, and the guns of the planet killers went cold over Ashet-Vel without having fired a single shot. They withdrew the way they had come. Cold, silent, falling back into the dark that had hidden them for 130 days. 3 motes vanishing from the passive plots of a fleet that would spend the next 1,000 years wondering where they had gone, and never once daring to assume there were not more. Behind them, on 200 worlds, the recording of the corpse sitting up was already being copied into 10,000 archives, and it would be taught to children who had never seen a human face. And it would not be an obituary. Wren Adeyemi sat at her signal station as the Ceto fell back into the dark, 26 years old, and listened one last time to the required channel, not to the hegemony now, but to the 200 worlds beyond it, where the flat ceremonial cadence of a closed account had given way to something the conquered had no protocol for. The sound of a galaxy revising, live and in real time, everything it had been told about the species it had been ordered to bury. She heard a client species diplomat, the same voice perhaps that had once made a casual joke about humans as one jokes about a weather system that has passed, struggle to find words, and fail and simply say into the silence of 200 worlds. They had the world in their hands. They had every right, and they gave it back. She heard a Vel'Shaan voice, low and shaken on the surface of Ashet-Vel, telling someone off-channel that the humans were not extinct, that the humans had come, that the humans had held 40 billion lives under the knife and chosen not to close the account, and that it did not know, what kind of people did such a thing, only that they were still out there in the dark, uncounted, and that the arm would never again be able to pretend it had weighed them. And Wren, listening, understood at last what the whole grueling long drive had been for. Not the guns, never the guns. It had been for this single line, going out now to every world that had received the obituary, that the aliens had announced humanity's extinction to the galaxy, and Earth's planet killers had crossed 130 days of dark to the enemy's heart, and proven them wrong, not by burning a world, but by refusing to in front of everyone, with the killing shot 4 seconds away, and their whole murdered species grief screaming for it. She keyed the internal line one last time as the Ceto fell home into the dark, and logged the final entry of the long drive in the flat, steady voice she had spent 130 days learning to hold. Signals to command. The required channel is carrying our answer to 200 worlds. The obituary is being overwritten in every archive that received it. She paused and let herself feel, for exactly the length of one long breath, the thing she was finally allowed to feel. They said the matter of the humans was closed, Captain. It's the first line in every archive now, and right underneath it forever is what we wrote. And what did we write, Lieutenant? Vandal's dry voice gentle now. Wren looked at the dark ahead, where a species that had been declared extinct was falling home to build whatever came next, and she answered. That they were wrong, she said, about all of it, especially the part they were most sure of. We were never the thing they buried. We're the thing that came back and chose not to become them, and made them watch. The Ceto fell into the dark, and the gun stayed cold, and behind her, across 200 worlds, humanity's obituary quietly, permanently, became the story of the morning the corpse sat up, looked its killers in the eye, and let them live.